So I would talk about assisted migration as a concept and how what we did to use assisted migration to demonstrate the concept and to demonstrate what would happen if we use assisted migration to enhance and preserve European forest carbon sink. I will start with this very interesting graph, a study by Brücke and others. It shows the temperature anomaly throughout the geographic time epoch. And at the same time, we can see that the fossil tree genera in Europe was the highest in the pre-Holocene time. And surprisingly, the ones that are surviving, the tree genera that are surviving after the Holocene, Europe happens to be the least in terms of the tree species diversity. So this means that drastic decline in tree species diversity existed in pre-human times. And they also found that this is probably due to mismatch of the species niches and changing environment and lags in adaptation and migration, which would be something which I will talk about today. So our previous speakers have set the stage very well about the possible effects of climate change on European forest, starting from tree species distribution changes favoring more broad-leaved. So this study by Mark and his colleagues in 2012, they found also what we found recently with ensemble species distribution model. There is an example of Norway spruce declining in its distribution throughout its range. So under both 2-degree and 4-degree warming scenarios. And then this also sets the stage for our friends, pests and pathogens, to come and occupy these niches. For example, Diplodia for Austrian pine, some for beech, for ash species, the Hymenoskipas, the ash dieback, the reason of the big ash dieback, that is a problem throughout Europe. And then we can also see the increase in not only the frequency, but also the magnitude of bark beetle attacks and this is in German, the amount of wood that is harvested because of these insects. So climate change is really going to cause a lot of problems in European forests, and a lot is at stake. Just to demonstrate what happens, what is the relation between climate change and local adaptation. Just imagine this simple graph as the historical tree species range from blue to red, demonstrating cold and warm end of the distribution. And when climate changes, the older range or the historic species range gets hotter and new range gets available. And what happens in the older or the hotter range is that all these insects, all the pests, pathogens, and all the forest disturbances comes and plays havoc. And in the new ranges that become available, the species can either migrate or adapt. So how does forest species respond? They can either migrate, they can adapt, or in most cases, they can become extinct. But the problem with these natural processes is that they are extremely slow, at least for migration and adaptation. And this, what it makes is that the climate change really then alters this link between the tree species population and the local environment. And this is why assisted migration is important. And as I said, what is at stake? A lot is at stake. We all know that in Europe, the amount of growing stock is increasing. So this is a good thing, a lot of sequestration, but at the same time, there's a lot of food for bark beetles and a lot of forest for candidates that is becoming available for fires and so on. And therefore, if we do nothing, if we don't do anything, a lot of this thing can become source in no time. So assisted migration is discussed as a tool and also as a concept to adapt tree species and populations to track climate change. So this is basically an umbrella term that includes assisted population migration. This means choosing the right kind of seed sources for a given planting location, and also changing species composition, so within and beyond a species geographic range. And this assisted migration, as we propose, can be used differently depending on the severity of the situation. We call it the 3 lines of defense to defend forest ecosystem services to climate change. So first, if the forests are affected by climate change, we can go for assisted population migration, which means choosing the right genotypes, stronger thinning measures, and so on, or planting species mixture of native species. And if in very dramatic and drastic situations, we can also go for planting non-native tree species. And this is planting non-native tree species, for example. This opens even more wide discussion regarding invasiveness and many other policy-related things. So in Europe, throughout the world, assisted migration is being discussed and also implemented. For example, in British Columbia, in North America, in Canada, assisted migration has already been implemented to adapt the seed zones. For in Europe, there are many questions which needs to be answered, like which are the tree species that can be used in the future? What are the populations? What is the transfer limits of these populations? And the most importantly, as is also stressed by other speakers, there are a lot of legal constraints of this seeds transfer. No matter how much research we do, there is always in Brussels and also in each countries, we need to decide and we need to work on our laws regarding seed transfer. Nevertheless, I will present the results from a recently concluded EU project SUSTRI, where we collaborated and collected a range of provenance trial data for the 7 stand-forming and the most important tree species. We collected provenance trial data from 575 trials, where more than 10,600 provenances were tested. To my knowledge, this is the biggest collection of provenance trial data that exists till date in Europe. And these trials are not only varying geographically, but they also are varying in the climatic extreme. So these black dots represent the provenance trial locations, and these red ones represents the provenance origin for the 7 species. So what we wanted to answer is how much carbon could be added to European forests if both species and seed sources are optimized for the future. And we looked into the forest, a new forest or a juvenile forest of 40 years of age. And we designed a modeling algorithm to answer. So first we wanted to identify for each grid cell of Europe, what is the best suited, climatically best suited tree species. And then for each identified best suited tree species, we want to test what would happen to carbon sink if we plant local seed sources. That means seed sources which are climatically and geographically proximate to the planting location. And what would happen if we go for adapted seed sources? So irrespective of this climatic distance, the seed sources which are going to produce the highest carbon sink. So first, we identified the best species with this ensemble species distribution model. This is, we again found the common trend that the oaks and other broadleaves are going to be favored in the future. And for each of these grid cells where each of these species are best suited, then we use the universal response function. So this is a type of model which models, say, any trait. So in our case, it was carbon sink as a function of climate of planting location and seed origin. So we are combining both, the proxies of the environmental factors of the trait variation and the genetic factors of the trait variation. So this is a very simple representation of the response function, but actually the response function had a lot of climate variable and was pretty complicated and I would say computationally expensive. So to answer the questions of uncertainty, we had 10 different distribution models, 5 different climate models, 7 different response functions. In total, we evaluated around 1,600 model combinations to answer the differences. But luckily, for all these model combinations, we get similar kinds of trends. So first, we identified at any given location, where should the seed sources come from? So here I can show you the example of Norway spruce. So you can see, depending on the colors, say in the middle of the distribution, local seed sources will perform better under contemporary climate, but in the future, for the suitability of the local seed sources diminishes, and seed sources, for example, for a large part of its distribution, the Atlantic and the Pannonian distribution of the seed sources are going to be the ones which would have the highest carbon sink. So I'm talking only about carbon sink. There will be a lot of trade-offs, maybe with other traits that should be actually very strictly scrutinized and investigated. So now summarizing these, we found that each of these colors represents a species. So if we plant local seed sources, we can, under contemporary climate, we can view, say, around 44 million tons of carbons annually, which is around 28% of the annual European forest carbon sequestration. And in the future, it declines to around 16%. So in the scenario where we plant only local seed sources, so which means here we are only changing the species. We are not talking about adapting the seed sources. But if we adapt the seed sources plus the species, we can think about 29% of the European annual carbon sink. So no matter what we do, there will be a decline in the European forest carbon sink, but this decline will be drastically low if we also think about adapting our seed sources and not only adapting our species composition. So we are talking about an increase of around 84% annual carbon sink if we adapt both species and the seed sources. Now, this also has a great implication for EU's target for climate neutrality by 2050. So if we convert this into CO2 equivalents, we can see that we can increase the sequestration by around 85%. So we can increase it from 20% of the target to around 37% of the EU's whole target by 2050. Now, to conclude, we find that conifers might be needed to be replaced by deciduous trees in large part of European forest distribution, having great consequences of ecosystem services and diversity of the tree species and ecosystem and forest diversity as a whole. But this change will result in around 32 to 43% if we only stick to local seed sources. And we can drastically improve it by also looking into adapting not only the species, but also the seed origin. And this is true also if we take into consideration very drastic warming scenarios like the RCP4 8.5. And then we really need this kind of transnational exchange of data that we could fortunately gather in this project to boost European forest resilience to climate change. So this is not my last slide. So all this work is now available as a decision support system. You can all just type in this URL, seedforforest.org, and this is a decision support system where we can first, we identify, just like Uber, as we order Uber or any other taxi, we just identify a given planting location. And in the first step, the system gives me the best seed, the best species that is available for this planting location based on its vulnerability in the future. And if I select the species that I want to plant, then the system will, from this response function, will give me the list Of all these seed sources that are registered in the Formatis database, which is going to have highest carbon sink for this particular planting location, and this can be downloaded and this can be taken for seed sourcing strategy. This can be taken to the nurseries to tell them, look, I want this and this national register number seed sources. Can you help me with that? So this is just to show you that this is not only a research output, but we are putting this into practice. And then I would like to invite you all to this plenary session that I'm organizing with Sylvia Schuler and Professor Anders Hammond from Alberta. It's on assisted migration in climate change, and we are going to have a lot of very, very nice presentation and a lot of poster next year in UFRO. So thank you very much for your attention, and I would gladly like to answer any questions if there is any. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I think there will be a lot of questions. Yes, Tanya, please go ahead.
Hi, very interesting. This is also a big discussion in Finland, where I'm from, where it kind of ties to the forest management practices and the rotation times that will also affect the realized carbon sink and how economically feasible that is. Does this model take the forest management practices into account, or the rotation time and that kind of issues? Or
no.
Is this just assuming natural?
This does not assume natural regeneration. So it assumes both. So the local seed sources, mainly it can be taken as a proxy of natural regeneration. So we are dealing with whatever is regenerating. And the second part is that these models can also answer the question about, if I have a particular planting location, other than relying on natural regeneration, where should I source my seed from to, have the best carbon sink? But we are also working on other ecosystem services and, expand this decision tool to also around 18 non-native tree species and an additional 30 native species in 2 more projects. But we cannot answer the question about the management. So we have some regional models in-house which answers these questions, but not with this one.
Thank you.
Fantastic talk. I'm curious to know, for developing the universal response functions, does the trait that you're measuring matter? Because presumably you focused a lot on height with the provenance trials, but we know that there's a variety of issues potentially with that. So I'm curious what trait data are going into your universal response functions.
Yeah. I am also concerned, I share your concern about these trade-offs. Unfortunately, these provenance trials, when they were established, so we are talking about the 1970s, 80s. So they were basically designed not to answer questions about climate change. So you can think about, at the most, survival. So trees, height, diameter, survival, volume. But for certain species, like Douglas fir, for example, we have the luxury of detailed traits like frost tolerance, mortality due to frost. Only for some species like Douglas fir, we have this. So we really would love to address this question of the trade-offs between the different traits, but we cannot. But we just have to assume that carbon sink or dominant tree somehow is a proxy of the forest surviving all other trade-offs. Unfortunately, we cannot answer that.
Thank you very much. Yes, Phil?
Hi, very interesting talk. So at some point you discuss not only using new seed sources, so better adapted ones, but also shifting species, shifting from conifer to deciduous forest. So my question is twofold. First, how is that going to happen? How you're going to have a conifer forest becoming a deciduous forest by itself, by human intervention? And these conifers and angiosperms, they grow in entirely different ecosystem types. So these percentages that you have shown, are they taken into account mycorrhizal associations, metagenomic biodiversity of the soil, and all sorts of other factors that may really influence if the growth is going to be better and the carbon sink is going to work better?
Yes, I'm glad you asked this question. Unfortunately not. We tried with the soil as a cofactor compared to climate, but we really need very good soil data to answer. So it is not the question about the modeling issue, it's a question about the data that we have. This European, the JRC soil data that we have, this is a 1 kilometer resolution soil data. This does not say anything about the mycorrhizal associations and so on. So unfortunately, we cannot say anything about this mycorrhizal and the soil and this microhabitat. So what I wanted to say, what I want you to take home as a message is that it gives a very rough estimation of what you can expect. And then as one of our colleagues said, that we also need models for evaluating the different management regimes to answer these kinds of detailed questions. So what I can answer with my models is that very rough screening of where to start and what to general trends, but unfortunately not these microhabitat related questions that you are referring to.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot. As far as I understood, all the models are based on single species provenance trials, right?
Yes.
So I guess the next step would be to try and see multi-species provenance trials, because there is also an interaction between species. Is that right? Is that planned?
Well, we in Austria we have established a multi-species provenance trial, but the question is like if you want to make a decision support or give a general idea, well, you need a really big data set, not only say in Austria. So with these multi-species, we can answer some questions about provenance recommendations in the multi-species environment in Austria, but I would not be able to answer questions about, a broad transnational seed trade and movement, which is actually what we need right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, Tanya. I think it will be the last question because we don't want to make our lunch break short.
So in addition to these provenance trials, there are also a lot of these progeny trials of improved genetic material. So wouldn't it be also interesting to compare the kind of natural seed source outside the local area to the improved material that there is already available for many species that is used quite a lot for some of these species, at least Scots pine and Picea abies.
Yes, this will certainly be interesting. We were working. I was not so much involved in that partially. So we also looked into the intra-provenance differences, also with the colleagues from the Czech University of Life Sciences. I can see Jaroslav and Jury there. Probably you can catch them too, who are sitting on the last. I can see them. So maybe you can talk to them. They really worked very deep in this aspect. PhD student Valerie did some great work in this aspect. I was only partially involved in that, but yeah, in this break you should catch them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.